Welcome to the debate. So think about a concert pianist. They spend, thousands of hours in a practice room just playing complex scales to a completely empty auditorium.
Right, just them and the piano.
Exactly. The acoustics are perfectly controlled, the environment is utterly safe, and in that isolation, they strike the keys flawlessly.
But the moment they step onto a stage in front of a live audience, the entire environment shifts. I mean, the temperature in the room changes. Someone coughs in the third row.
Yeah, the variables completely change.
They do. And most importantly, the pianist experiences a sudden spike in their own heart rate. So the physical, mechanical action of striking the keys is exactly the same, but the human context completely alters the reality of the performance.
And that exact shift from the safe isolation of the practice room to the terrifying unpredictability of the live stage is the hardest part of learning to perform anything. And today we are debating a methodology that attempts to completely rewrite that transition.
Specifically in the realm of language and human communication, right?
Yes, we're looking at a piece of source material titled The AI Method, From English Student to Fluent Practitioner. It details the speaker's journey between 2024 and 2026, where they transitioned from struggling with really rigid academic grammar to achieving highly effective professional fluency.
And the crux of this transformation, the really controversial part, is that the speaker treated artificial intelligence as their primary daily mentor. They essentially moved their entire language practice room into an algorithmic space.
Which brings us to the central question we are exploring today. Does relying on AI for real-time conversational practice and tone adjustment actually unlock true language fluency and authentic connection?
Or does it risk replacing genuine human nuance with algorithmic mimicry?
Right. To lay my cards on the table, I argue that AI fundamentally solves the deeply entrenched psychological barriers of language learning. It provides this relentless, judgment-free environment that builds essential muscle memory and communicative effectiveness.
And I argue that while AI is, undeniably useful for mechanical grammar, outsourcing empathy and tone to an algorithm to learn what the speaker calls the English of a CEO, well, it fundamentally undermines the genuine human connection they ultimately claim to seek.
Okay, so to really get into this, I think we have to start by looking at what was blocking the speaker in the first place.
The academic background. Exactly.
When I go through this material, what stands out isn't just a clever use of technology. It is a profound psychological adaptation. The speaker explicitly notes the transition from, quote, knowing the rules to living the language. Think about their background. For years, they were trapped in silent classrooms, right? Approaching English as a rigid academic subject to be studied and tested on. They could read perfectly, they could write essays,
but they completely lacked professional, conversational confidence. It's the classic gap between comprehension and production.
Exactly. And, why does that gap even exist? Because as the material rightly points out, the biggest hurdle in language learning isn't a lack of vocabulary.
Right.
I mean, if you're listening to this and you've ever frozen up while trying to order coffee in a foreign country or hesitated during a cross-border Zoom call, you know exactly what the speaker is talking about.
Oh, absolutely. The brain just stops working.
Your brain actually has the vocabulary filed away, but the paralyzing fear of looking foolish, of making a mistake in front of another human being, literally cuts off your access to that filing cabinet.
It's the fear of human judgment.
Precisely. In applied linguistics, they call it the affective filter. When your anxiety spikes, a metaphorical filter goes up in your brain, and language processing simply shuts down.
Yeah, it's a well-documented phenomenon.
Right. So the speaker used AI to bypass this entirely by creating a judgment-free zone. Every single morning for 30 minutes, they simulated high-stakes professional scenarios, job interviews, project pitches, difficult negotiations.
Wow.
And they specifically instructed the AI not to be easy on them, to correct grammar in real time, and to demand professional synonyms.
Well, I come at it from a different way. I look at the progression of the speaker's method, specifically what they detail later as the feedback loop phase, and I see a deeply concerning shift in what is actually being learned.
Really? How so?
Well, I readily acknowledge that AI is an excellent structural tool. I mean, if you need to figure out why a verb conjugation is wrong or find a synonym for a technical term, it is unparalleled.
Right, it's incredibly efficient.
But the speaker draws us across a critical, almost invisible boundary when they start using AI to dictate their tone. They take their raw scripts and put them into the machine and ask, is this persuasive enough? Make it authoritative. Make it empathetic.
But isn't that exactly what the text argues taught them, the actual nuance of the language, rather than just the textbook rules?
But we have to ask ourselves, is it true nuance? Let's talk about what a large language model actually does when you ask it for an empathetic tone. It doesn't feel empathy.
Well, obviously not.
Right. It doesn't understand the emotional weight of your specific situation. It simply looks at a massive data set of text where human beings have expressed sympathy, maps the most frequently co-occurring words, and gives you the mathematical middle ground.
I mean, that's how it functions mechanically, yes.
Exactly. So when you ask it to be empathetic, you are no longer learning the living, breathing English language. You are adopting an algorithm's statistical average of human emotion.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how this judgment-free zone actually operates in practice. I don't see it as mediating or averaging out their humanity at all.
You don't.
No, I see it as unlocking it. Think about the flight simulator analogy again. What the speaker is doing with AI language practice is exactly like a pilot in a flight simulator.
Okay, I'm following you.
A pilot needs to crash 1,000 times in that simulator, right? Experiencing the blaring alarms, the massive cognitive load, the required split-second decision-making long before they ever take the yoke of a real commercial airliner.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered that a flight simulator relies on the laws of aerodynamics, which are objective and fixed? Human communication relies on psychology, which is entirely subjective.
Sure, but the cognitive load on the pilot is real, just as the cognitive load on the language learner is real. When you are translating a complex thought from your native tongue into English during a live, high-stakes negotiation, your working memory is completely overloaded.
Which is a massive amount of mental processing.
It is! You're trying to remember the grammar, you're trying to find the right industry vocabulary, and you're trying to read the body language of the executives across the table.
All at the same time.
Exactly. And because you were terrified of making a grammatical error, you stumble. That stumble makes you lose your train of thought, and suddenly you've lost the room. What the AI did by demanding professional synonyms and correcting grammar in real time during those simulated pitches was offload that mental processing.
By automating the mechanics.
Yes, it automated the raw mechanics of the language in the speaker's brain. By failing 1,000 times in a completely safe space, they built literal neurological muscle memory. So when they finally stepped out of the simulator and in front of real humans, they actually had the cognitive bandwidth to look up from their notes and connect.
Have you considered, though, that removing the human judgment from the practice room also fundamentally removes the human stakes?
What do you mean by stakes in this context?
Yes, a flight simulator is a safe space to fail mechanically. But when we communicate, the danger of human judgment isn't just a bug in the system, it is an integral feature of the communicative act.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree it's a feature.
Think about it. If you only practice empathy, persuasion, and negotiation with a machine that cannot actually feel persuaded, you are practicing a sterile, sanitized version of human interaction.
But they're learning the vocabulary to express those things.
Yes, but the AI doesn't have a bad day. The AI doesn't hold a subtle bias you have to read in its facial expression. The AI doesn't get irrationally defensive because you used a slightly wrong tone.
That's true.
By practicing exclusively in a judgment-free void, the speaker might be building a massive vocabulary, but they are not preparing themselves for the unpredictable, messy reality of a live audience.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. The text doesn't suggest the speaker entirely replaced human interaction with AI forever.
Well, no, but it was their primary practice tool.
Right. It clearly states that AI was their primary mentor to bridge a very specific, paralyzing gap. And we really need to look at what exactly they were simulating. The text highlights that in the professional world, English isn't just about grammatical correctness. It is about effectiveness.
Ah, yes, the English of a CEO concept.
Exactly. Let's dig into that. In global business, language is highly specialized. It's almost like an API for human corporate interaction.
An API. That's a very mechanical way to look at it.
But it's true. When the speaker used the AI to generate 3 or 4 different versions of a single sentence asking to see an authoritative version, then an empathetic version, then a highly technical version. They were learning the specific, highly effective jargon of leadership.
So they were learning to sound like a CEO?
CEO English is a tool. It is a specific register of language designed to achieve specific outcomes in a boardroom. By seeing those variations side by side, the speaker learned how to calibrate their delivery. They weren't becoming a robot, they were mastering a new, highly effective instrument.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You call it a highly effective instrument, but who, or rather what, decides what constitutes that empathetic or authoritative tone?
The data set, presumably. The collective use of the language.
Right. We touched on this, but we need to go deeper into the homogenization problem. When the AI tells the speaker this is how a CEO sounds, it isn't giving them a profound insight into leadership. It is feeding them a generic algorithmic flattening of expression.
But isn't that standardization exactly what the speaker needed to survive and thrive? I mean, they were struggling to be understood in a globalized business environment.
Sure, to be understood mechanically.
Understanding the standard is the first step to participating in the conversation at all.
Survival in a corporate environment is one thing, but the speaker explicitly frames this journey as finding their power and their voice. If your authoritative voice is literally just the mathematical average of every generic corporate memo ever scraped from the internet, you risk losing your unique perspective.
I think that's a bit of an exaggeration.
Is it? You lose the very cultural nuances, the slight structural differences, the personal idiosyncrasies that actually make you compelling as an individual speaker. When you ask a machine to calibrate your empathy, you aren't mastering an instrument.
What are you doing then?
You are sanding down the edges of your own humanity to fit into a statistically generated mold of what effective supposedly sounds like. It's not a voice, it's a corporate brochure. It's a simulacrum of leadership.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because I think it completely ignores the explicit intent of the speaker and the actual day-to-day methodology they used.
How so?
Let's look at how they describe the culmination of this process. The speaker states, and I quote, "AI is a tool, but the intent must be human. I used AI to sharpen my tools, but the stories I told and the passion I showed were mine."
Yes, I remember that quote.
The algorithmic flattening you are warning against would only be a fatal problem if the AI were generating the underlying ideas, but the speaker maintains total agency over the core message.
Having agency over the core message doesn't mean the medium hasn't irreversibly altered that message by the time it reaches the audience.
But look at the specific consistency of their daily routine. They weren't just passively asking for scripts to read.
They were debating, yes.
Exactly. They would ask the AI to summarize an interesting, complex article, and then the speaker would actively debate that summary out loud. They are not passively regurgitating AI-generated text. They are using the AI as an intellectual sparring partner to test their own original ideas.
A sparring partner that mathematically optimizes tone.
But the passion, the lived experience, the actual stories they brought to the boardroom, those remained entirely human. The AI merely provided the linguistic scaffolding so those human stories could actually reach an audience without being obscured by an anxiety-induced language barrier.
Let's examine that daily routine closely, though, because I honestly think it proves my point. The speaker asks the AI to summarize an article. Stop right there.
Okay?
That means the very input they are receiving to spark their thought process is already mediated by an algorithm's determination of what is important in the text.
Well, they're just getting a summary.
Then they debate the AI out loud. They formulate a response, and presumably they use the feedback loop we discussed earlier to adjust their argument to sound more authoritative or executive.
Right, to be effective in their workplace.
So the input is an algorithmic summary, and the output is mathematically optimized for a specific corporate tone. Where is the unmediated human in that loop?
The human is the one initiating the loop. The human is choosing the article because of their own genuine curiosity.
I suppose.
The human is deciding which side of the debate to take, and ultimately the human is the one standing on the stage, looking their colleagues in the eye, and delivering the presentation.
Look, I don't deny that the speaker's confidence has grown immensely. Going from sitting paralyzed in a silent classroom to presenting fluently in high-stakes meetings is a highly effective adaptation. The results are on the page.
They are undeniable.
But we have to question their concluding philosophy. At the end of the text, they claim that they no longer seek perfection, they seek connection. They claim that through this AI method, they found the most efficient path to that human connection.
Which they did, by being able to communicate.
My argument is that efficiency and connection are often completely at odds with one another.
How can being better understood be at odds with connection? That doesn't make sense.
Because true human connection requires genuine vulnerability. It requires the friction of misunderstanding.
Friction.
Yes. When two people from different backgrounds try to communicate, there is a gap. The effort of bridging that gap together, the hesitation, the search for the right word, that friction is where empathy actually happens.
I see where you're going, but
If you systematically use an advanced feedback loop to eliminate all friction, all vulnerability, and all fear of judgment, you might become a flawlessly efficient speaker. You might command the boardroom perfectly, but you are broadcasting to your audience, you aren't connecting with them. You've optimized the humanity right out of the exchange.
But vulnerability is only valuable if it doesn't completely silence you. You're romanticizing the friction here.
I don't think I am.
The text shows us that the speaker was literally paralyzed by the academic rigor of traditional English education. The vulnerability of standing in a high-stakes meeting, freezing up, and failing to find the right word wasn't creating a beautiful moment of human connection. It was creating exclusion.
I understand the pain of that exclusion.
It was keeping them out of the room entirely. The AI method dismantled the wall that was causing that pain. It allowed them to finally move past the overwhelming anxiety of perfect grammar so they could actually look their audience in the eye and share their ideas.
Yes, they found a way into the room.
That is exactly why the text concludes that the language of the future belongs to those who adapt. They adapted their learning method to overcome a massive psychological barrier that traditional, human-led education had completely failed to tear down.
And I maintain that while dismantling the wall of anxiety is absolutely a necessary step for any learner, the blueprint they used to build their new voice from the rubble was drawn entirely by a machine.
I think it was drawn by their intent.
When we systematically outsource the nuances of our empathy and our authority to an algorithm, we have to pause and ask ourselves what vital pieces of our authentic, messy selves we are leaving behind in the pursuit of pure communicative efficiency.
Well, the transformation documented here is undeniable.
Yes, the mechanical fluency was achieved, but I remain rigorously skeptical of the underlying premise that an algorithm's statistical estimation of human emotion is the optimal path to genuine, vulnerable human connection.
Which brings us to a natural point of synthesis for today's discussion. When we step back and look at the entirety of the source material, it is clear we are witnessing a profound paradigm shift in how language, confidence, and communication can be mastered.
Absolutely, it's a huge shift.
For my part, the text demonstrates that by utilizing AI to relentlessly practice, fail, and iterate in a safe space, the speaker successfully dismantled a deeply entrenched psychological language barrier. They moved from the paralysis of silent classrooms to the dynamism of confident professional practice.
It's quite a leap.
It stands as a powerful testament to the idea that embracing technological adaptation can remove the mechanical friction of language, allowing the underlying human intent to finally be heard.
And from my perspective, the text serves as a fascinating success story, but also a vital cautionary tale. AI is undeniably a powerful, perhaps revolutionary structural tool for building vocabulary and conversational muscle memory by offloading cognitive load. However, we must draw a firm line at outsourcing our empathy, our tone, and our emotional resonance to an algorithm. True human connection demands genuine vulnerability and authentic expression, neither of which can be crowdsourced from a machine's advanced feedback loop without risking the very uniqueness of the humanity we are trying to convey.
We both agree that this material raises inescapable questions about the future of learning and the rapidly evolving intersection of technology and human communication. The speaker's transformation from a struggling student to a fluent practitioner is a documented reality within the text, and the sheer effectiveness of their method is hard to ignore.
Very true. But the text also forces us to wrestle with the unseen costs of that transformation. It demands that we ask exactly where the line is drawn between sharpening a communicative tool and fundamentally losing one's authentic voice in the machinery of optimization.
Indeed, it does. Thank you all for joining us for this intellectual exchange. There is much more to explore within the nuances of this material, and we encourage you to continue questioning how these underlying mechanisms shape the way we learn and interact with our world.
Because ultimately, whether you are practicing in a sterile algorithm or stepping out in front of a live, unpredictable audience, the human context changes everything.
Just like the concert pianist moving from the perfect, controlled isolation of the practice room to the messy, coughing reality of the live stage, we are all learning how to play our instruments in a rapidly changing world. We leave it to you to decide who or what should be writing the sheet music.